Hi everyone, how is everyone tonight? You'll be saying to yourself, Willow, why are you doing a podcast on a Tuesday? Well, I was supposed to have the Dark Mirror boys, but unfortunately something came up for the boys. So I will have them on at a later date. And I thought, well, since I've got this slot booked, I might as well use it to my advantage. So I thought, why not put out my crime show? Now, I was going to do Fred and Rose West, but considering that the time that this is actually going out, guys, and YouTube are the rhythms and time zones across the world, I thought I would change it and do Sunday's subject, a famous killers who's poisoned people. Now, you've seen it in a lot of the news recently that it's been big news that just now that people are poisoning people. There was one famous at Christmas. A woman poisoned her family, and she killed three of her family. They're actually looking to exhume her ex-husband's body, because he died, in the exact same sort of circumstances. So they think he's been poisoned as well. So I just thought, why not do this? Because it seems to be the topic just now is poison. So please don't be taking any ideas from this, guys. So before we begin, this Thursday on the Mystical Carousel Show, 9 p.m. UK time, we will have, we won't have a guest, we'll be talking about the Black Eyed Children. Is it real or is it fiction? I find the Black Eyed Children very, very fascinating as a subject. On Friday, one of our co-hosts has got a big milestone because it's their birthday on Friday. Happy birthday to question mark. I'm going to say that for Friday, guys. We will be having a birthday bash. We also will be having Vanessa Fogo on, guys. So please tune in, please enjoy, and enjoy this pre-recording as well, guys. So fear not, even though I'm not here, I will be coming back. I will be sharing out. I will be looking at the comments. So I will individually reply to you guys. So fear not. So famous killers who's poisoned people. So the one that always stands out to me is a documentary that I seen on Amazon Prime, and it was a documentary about Graham Young, and he was known as the teacup poisoner. He was an English serial killer who murdered his victims through poisoning them. He was very obsessed with poisons from an early age. He started poisoning the food and drink of relatives and school friends. He actually killed his stepmom by poisoning her. Three of his friends that he poisoned, he actually didn't mean to poison. He actually wanted other kids to eat the cakes, but unfortunately they three, so they were non-fatal poisonings. He was caught when his teacher became suspicious and had contacted the police. Now, Young pleaded guilty to three non-fatal poisonings, and aged 14 years old, yes, ladies and gentlemen, 14 years old, he was detained at Broadmoor. He later took responsibility for the death of his stepmom, though that's not been proven. Now, here's the thing, when you look at Graham Young's early life, he was born on the 7th of September 1947. He had an older sister, Winfred. After his mum died of tuberculosis, he was 14 weeks old. Young was sent to live with an uncle and aunt, while his sister went to live with her grandparents. Several years after, Young's father actually remarried and the family were reunited. Now, as I said to you, Young was fascinated from an early age with poisons. their effects. How did it work? What effects would they have when people did kill people? Um, and he actually considered Victorian poisoner William Palmer to be his hero. He also read extensively about black magic, Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany. He was very, very fascinated with Hitler as well. In 1959, Young attended a boys' school where he started to read books on advanced toxology. Now, in early, say, 1961, Young acquired atomy, uh, ammonium, from a local chemist. He actually signed the poisons register in the name of M.E. Evans. His knowledge of poisons in chemistry, that's how he managed to convince the chemist to sell him the poisons, because he was very convincing. He was very, very, very knowledgeable in toxicology. So that would have been easy for Graham Young to go in there and talk his way into getting these poisons. Especially if you read something and become very, very advanced, you know the terminology to use, you know how to get a hold of these things. So, beginning in February, he began poisoning members of his family. First, his stepmom, who suffered vomiting, diarrhea, stomach pain, which you can imagine, which she'd actually put down as sickness bugs. Before long, his father started suffering the same stomach cramps. He was in bed for days at a time. Soon after, his sister became sick on a couple of occasions over the summer. Shortly afterwards, Young himself actually fell violently ill. It even seemed if the mystery bug had spread beyond the household, because even at Young's school, same people were suffering from the exact same symptoms. Now, can you imagine that these people are all falling ill extremely quickly? Everybody's got it, including Young himself. Um, in November 1961, Winfred was served. Bleh. I do apologise, guys. Winfred was served a cup of tea by her brother one morning, but found it taste so sour she only took one mouthful before she threw it away. Now you can imagine Winfred's on the train to work an hour later and she begins to hallucinate. And she had to actually be helped out of the station and was eventually taken to hospital, where the doctors came to the conclusion that she's somehow been exposed to the poisonous belladonna, which is a type of poison. Young was then confronted by his father, but he claimed that Winfred had been using the family's teacups to mix shampoo. Again, Young's father searched his room, but he found nothing incriminating. Nevertheless, he warned his son to be more careful in future when messing about with those bloody chemicals. Now, you can imagine how clever Young must have been to convince his father, or try and convince him that it wasn't him, it was nothing to do with him. Now, on the Easter Sunday in 1962, Young's stepmom died. Her death was attributed to a prolapse, a cervical disc, which was believed to have resulted from a road accident. Though much later, you can imagine, Young's admitted that he poisoned her with a lethal dose of theridium at her wake. Young poisoned a male relative after lacing a jar of mustard pickle with ammonium. Shortly afterwards, his father became seriously ill and was taken to hospital, where he was told that he was suffering from ammonium poisoning and one more dose would have killed him. Now, Young's auntie grew suspicious, as you can imagine, folks, because his fascination. So did a science teacher who discovered several bottles of poison in his school desk. Now, the teacher and the headmaster arranged for Young to be interviewed by a psychiatrist posing as a careers advisor who contacted police after Young revealed his extensive knowledge of poisons and toxicology. Now, he was arrested in the May in 1962 after returning home from school. Um, a couple of poisons were found in his possession. When questioned by police, he confessed to poisoning his father, stepmother, sister, and a school friend. Now, one of the psychiatrists testified that Young had a psychopathic disorder rather than a mental illness, and he'd failed to develop a normal moral sense. He felt it was extremely likely that Young would reoffend and recounter a conversation in which Young said, I am missing that antimony. I miss the power it gives me. Now you can imagine that Young has become fascinated with people poisoning people, and you can imagine the thrill that's gave him watching these people suffer, especially his stepmom who died. He actually watched this woman in pain, ladies and gentlemen. Um, so he was put to Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire, an institution which is for patients with mental disorders who've committed criminal offences. Um, that's where Ronnie Kray was in Broadmoor. Um, sorry guys, I'm letting my cat out. Uh, so you can imagine. Um, so Young pled guilty to three charges of poisoning his father, the sister, the school friend. He was convicted of maliciously administration of a noxious thing to inflict grievous bodily harm. He was not charged though for murdering his stepmom, as her autopsy report did not list it as poison as the cause of death. Here's the thing, one of the poisons that he used that I learned a lot about was that the fact that if it doesn't have a taste, that it's tasteless. So you wouldn't be able to taste this one. And I don't think folk that have been researching to- toxins and poisons, um, but I did read about it a wee bit. That it doesn't have a taste, and it can list up. Sometimes it can never ever be found in your system. So that was you learn something new every day, folks. So the judge ruled that Young was to be detained under the Section 60 of the Mental Health Act at Broadmoor. Furthermore, he was not to be released for 15 years without the approval of the Home Secretary. So, his time at Broadmoor, he was the youngest ever inmate in Broadmoor's history. Soon after his arrival, Young actually was suspected of killing a fellow inmate because he died of cyanide poisoning, um, and not because he enjoyed explaining. Young was suspected by some of the staff and inmates, not least because he enjoyed explaining in detail how cyanide could be extracted from laurel leaves. The grounds around Broadmoor were covered with laurel bushes. However, Young's involvement was never proven and this guy's death was actually ruled as suicide. Now, there was he would actually gone to poison more people in Broadmoor, nurses' coffees, missing packet of sugar soap were discovered in a tea urn. Young continued to read. Still, even in Broadmoor, he was still reading about medical and toxicology textbooks. He also continued his interest in the Nazis. At one point, he grew a toothbrush moustache and took to mimicking the speeches of Hitler. He would listen to musicals, one of them being Richard Wagner, who had been one of Hitler's idols even. In 1965, Young first applied for release from Broadmoor. His father and sister attended the tribunal and stated that if Young was released, none of his relatives would be willing to house him. His father also insisted that his son should have never been released. That was when Young's application was rejected. 5 years later, he tried again, and one of the psychiatrists wrote to the Home Secretary to recommend Young's release, announcing that he's no longer obsessed with poisons, violence, and mischief, and he's no longer a danger to others. However, he did make a remark to Young had made a remark to a Broadmoor nurse and said, "When I get out, I'm going to kill one person for every year I've spent in this place." Now that should have been the done deal there, and that should have been another rejection, but it wasn't. They actually let him go this time. So his later crimes was Young was released from Broadmoor in 1971 after 8 years detention. Now he's talking about killing one person for every year that he was in there. So 8 years, 8 people that would have been. He initially stayed with his sister and her husband. Um, Within weeks, he'd resumed his interest in poisons, but an attempt to acquire poison from John Bell in Croydon um, was unsuccessful as the chemist refused to sell them without written authorization. Now, Young duly returned with the required authorization on Bedford College headed notepaper and was sold 25 grams of ammonium potassium tartrate. He told the chemist that he needed it for an analysis, and he actually returned to the same chemist and purchased a further 25 grams of thallium, which just shows you folks that how clever this man was. He knows how to, what words to use. He knew what paper to use so that he could get the authorization to get more on poisons. So it just showed you that the man wasn't even rehabilitated. He was planning on doing this again, guys, and he went on to do it again. So he attended a storekeeping training course in Slough, and he stayed in a hostel. He'd befriended 34-year-old there and another resident of the hostel, and two occasional visited a pub together. Um, or shared a bottle of wine. Young would later confess to poisoning this gentleman. On the night of February the 10th, this gentleman fell violently ill, was shown diarrhea, pins and needles in his legs, pain in his testicles. Earlier in the evening, he'd accepted a glass of water from Young. Now, overnight, um, the following, sorry, over the following months, he became even more ill. He felt so ill during a football match that he had to leave the pitch after a few minutes. Specialists were unable to pinpoint the cause. Usually, they would diagnose it with kidney infection, bowel infection, UTI, or stomach infection. And as soon as this young man left the area in 1971, he gradually recovered. Guys, now can you imagine for a long time you've been really, really ill? You can't pinpoint it, but as soon as you leave the area away from the person that's causing it, that you suddenly feel better. Um, so then he Young secured a job as an assistant storekeeper um, at the John Hadley Laboratories. And you'll be saying, oh my God, how did he manage to get into a job round poisons? Because that's what it was. It was dealing with poisons, infrared lenses, which was used in military equipment. So Young obtained his supplies of the poison from a London chemist. Now, on his application, Young falsely claimed that his lack of employment history was because he'd suffered a nervous breakdown following the death of his mother in a car accident. His employers received references as part of his rehabilitation from Broadmoor. Now, but was not he was they were not there. Sorry, I do apologise tonight, guys. I'm all fingers and thumbs. He They weren't notified that he was a convicted poisoner and a former Broadmoor patient. Now, this is not the first case that I've heard where a workplace has not been informed of somebody's past history. Now, Young's new colleagues found him unpredictable. He could be keeping himself to himself, but on other days he could be more cheerful. During breaks, he usually sat alone reading. Now, you can imagine what one of the books would have been: War, Chemistry, the Nazis, or Famous Murderers. Young was not talkative unless one of his favourite topics were being discussed. His duties at Hadley used collecting drinks from the tea trolley in the corridor and bringing them to the storeroom. That each employee had their own mug, which made it easier for him to go for different people because they had their own mugs. So if he fell out with one person, then obviously it would have been easy for him to say, well, there, there you go, it's their mug. Here's a few drops of poison, and away you go. Soon after, he started poisoning his co-workers, um, focusing on his immediate colleagues in the storerooms. He would slip them poison into their tea or coffee. They would fall ill with symptoms that included vomiting, stomach pain, nausea, and diarrhea. Um, just the same symptoms as all the other victims that he had. Um, that Initially the mysterious illness was assumed to be a virus, and it actually got a nickname, the Bovitan bug. Now, they actually believed that it was a contamination of the local water supply because of obviously all the people um, that were getting poisoned, and because there was a disused airfield nearby. Now, he actually committed murder. His first victim was a storeroom manager in Young's superior. Now, he was a veteran. This man was a veteran of Dunkirk evacuation, and was often asked by Young about his wartime experiences. He began to feel ill in June 1971, weeks after Young's arrival on the company. He would take several days off work with diarrhea and stomach pains. His health improved after a week-long holiday, but on his return, Young actually put a lethal dose in his afternoon tea. Now, his condition deteriorated rapidly at this point, consisting of intense back pain, numbness in his fingers and feet. He was transferred to a intensive care unit where paralysis set in. And Young actually showed a lot of emotion and concern for this gentleman, and would repeatedly contact the hospital for updates on his progress. Now, this gentleman did die, but he had got a post mortem, but it didn't show any poison. Now, Young was chosen to accompany the managing director to this gentleman's funeral. Now, you can imagine that Young's killed this gentleman, and then he has went to the funeral. Um, Foster recalled Young remarking how sad it was that this victim came through the terrors of Dunkirk only to fall victim to some strange virus. Now, he went on to target more of his work colleagues, um, and he poisoned more. He poisoned a young lady in Man, and after leaving the company, one of the people actually perked up. Um, Young was actually promoted to head storeman for a probational period. Um, for the next few months, his poisons were limited to small doses, and his co-workers' tea, usually when she annoyed him. Young wrote in his diary, "Such and such irritated me yesterday, so I packed her off home with an attack of sickness. I only gave her some to shake her up. I now regret that I didn't give her a larger dose capable of laying her up for a few days." Then he went on to poison more people. So, one of the people that he put poison in his tea, he found that the tea was too sweet for his liking. Young would add sugar to disguise any sort of taste and therefore did not drink it all. Young administered a second dose. Then this gentleman was reported to hospital with numb legs, breathing difficulties, and chest pains. Now, his skin was so tender he could not endure the weight of the bed sheets. All his hair fell out. Young had a backup plan to visit this gentleman in the hospital and offer him a bottle of brandy that was laced with more poisoning. Um, this gentleman recovered, though he was left permanently imported by the poisoning. At the same time, he was poisoning um, another employee. Now, this one had become really friendly with Young and would give him a ride home. Now, Young admitted to administering 4 grams of poison in 2 doses, enough to kill him. However, the person found the coffee Young had made him too strong and did not drink it all. Nevertheless, he was admitted to hospital with stomach and chest pains, and his hair fell out. The poison made him suicidal. Now, Young apparently felt some remorse for poisoning this gentleman. "I feel rather ashamed in my action in harming such and such." Um, so you do see that he feels a bit of remorse for the fact that he'd poisoned this man who'd been so kind to him, giving him lifts home, taking him to work, things like that. Now he did go on to murder someone again. He might. he murdered a local councillor and part-time employee. He put 3 doses of poisoning into this gentleman's tea. Now, by the following day, this gentleman had developed chest pains and had trouble walking. Within days, he was admitted to the hospital and then he was transferred to another hospital. His central nervous system had deteriorated to the point he could not speak and had trouble breathing, and his skin began to peel off. I'm so sorry, guys, that was a bit graphic there. Young expressed concern again for this gentleman, um, and this gentleman died in 1971. Now, you can imagine the workplace is all in arms. They're like, what the hell is going on? Why is all these people down? The sickness levels were so high. Um, Meanwhile, some of the Young's co-workers began to have suspicions about him. Now you can imagine why. Now everybody in the workplace falls down except one. Why is that one person not suffering? And that's exactly what was happening with Young. Young was too busy poisoning other people that he never fell ill. And that's why his co-workers became really, really um, suspicious about Young, was because he was never affected by the bug. So they suggested that he might have been the carrier of the virus. Now, this gentleman informed the management of Young's unhealthy interest in poisons. Um, the firm's medical officer had told staff that he ruled out heavy metal poisoning as a possible cause, which then led to an argument with Young, who insisted that the symptoms displayed by victims pointed to this diagnosis. Now, intrigued by the young storeman, who seemed knowledgeable about medicine, he went and found him and questioned him further. He quickly discovered that Young had a deep knowledge of poisons and toxicology, which prompted the firm's owner to contact the police. Now, investigating officers noticed that the onset of the bug had just happened coincidental with Young's arrival in the company. Now, a background check was finally done, and this is where they discovered people that finally he had earlier convictions of poisoning. Now, he was arrested at his home of his aunt and uncle in Kent in November 1971. Nothing incriminating was found on his person. He denied any wrongdoing, but as he was led away, his aunt overheard him ask the officers, "Which one is it you're doing me for?" Um, and when police actually searched his bedsit, they discovered a large stash of bottles containing poisonings. Um, Other poisonings in his possession. His lodgings were also covered in Nazi stuff, photos of Nazi figures. Police also discovered a detailed diary of Young's doses, because he noted the doses he had administered, their effects, and whether he was going to allow each person to live or die. So basically, he was playing Russian roulette of, I'll let people live, no, let them die, I'll let them live, no, let them die. As you can imagine, he must have thought he was some sort of god. He could play with people's lives. He could decide, I let them live, I let them survive. I could actually let them die and give them a higher dose. Sorry, guys, I'm having a wee drink just now in case you hear a quick pause. So you can imagine this man playing God with people's lives. And the fact that he documented it, Upon further questioning by police, Young admitted that the initials in the diary referred to his co-workers. He actually confessed to poisoning and murdering the gentleman, and said that he deliberately used different poisons in order to confuse docs. He also boasted of having committed the perfect murder by killing his stepmother. He spent 20 minutes explaining to officers the effects that poisons had on the human body. When asked why he had poisoned people who were his friends and colleagues, excuse me, Young responded, I suppose I had ceased to see them as people. At least a part of me had. They were simply guinea pigs. So there you can see how brazen he was. He was looking for guinea pigs. He wanted guinea pigs, people that he could try it out on. He could end up poisoning and seeing what the effects would have been. Young was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, 4 counts of administration poisoning, with intent to endure, and 4 counts of administration poison with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. This is what's quite ironic. He actually then pled not guilty, which actually made it difficult to find a barrister who was willing to represent him. The trial had to be postponed several times. Eventually, somebody agreed to defend Young, and the trial went ahead in June 1972. Now, due to safeguards protecting defendants, the jury could not be told of Young's previous convictions for poisoning. He actually then took back his earlier confession to the police, claiming he had only made it in order to get some rest. Nevertheless, the evidence against him was so strong, the prosecution called 75 witnesses to give testimony. Young himself was the only witness in his defence. There was even parts of Young's diary were read out in court. He claimed the diary was a fantasy for a novel. The the examination and one of the victims' internal organs found poison in his intestines, kidneys, muscle, bones, and brain tissue. The cremated remains of the other person who had not yet been scattered was also found poison. So there was another 2 sets of evidence. After 1 hour and 38 minutes on June 1972, the jury found Young guilty of 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of GBH. He was found not guilty of administration poison, even though he did do it. Though his counsel Young requested that he'd be sent back to prison rather than to Broadmoor. His request was granted, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment, blah, 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 to be served at Park Lane Hospital. So he then obviously went there. Now, while at Ashworth, he actually befriended Ian Brady. And for people that don't know who Ian Brady is, Ian Brady is the Moors murderer, because they both had a fascination for Nazi Germany. Brady's 2001 book discuss various serial killers, including a chapter on Young. Now, Brady wrote that Young was generally asexual, finding every discussion of sexual matters not only interesting but distasteful. Young died in his cell at HM Parkhurst on the evening of the 1st of August 1990. So it's been speculated that he'd either committed suicide or was murdered by prisoners or staff who did not feel safe round about him. Now, the aftermath of this one is that obviously Young's trial ended. The Home Secretary gave a statement in the House of Commons about the issues raised by this case. He confirmed that more safeguards were to be introduced governing the release of mentally ill offenders. Um, so no patient at a special hospital was to be discharged without two recommendations from psychiatrists. Supervision of released patients were also to be improved. Um, there was a lot of wrongdoings in this one. Following Young's convictions, reports of a copycat poisonings appeared in the local press. Um, Howard Brownell killed himself, having been convicted that he'd been poisoned by Young after reading about the case. For the previous 18 months, he'd suffered from severe chest pains, which he'd traced back to an encounter in a pub where a young man obsessed with poisons and chemicals. In November 2005, a 16-year-old Japanese girl was arrested for poisoning her mother. She was fascinated by Young and kept an online blog, similar to Young's diaries, recordings, dosage, and reactions. The Poisons Act 1972 was created to restrict and control the sale of poisons after Young's court case um, concluded. Now, there is a lot of um, information that you could find on this, guys, if you are interested. There was a 1995 film called The Young Poisoner's Handbook. There was an ITV TV series called Terrible Coldness. Um, Apparently, Young expressed his hope that his waxwork would appear in Madame Tussauds, The Chamber of Horrors. He later got his wish and likeness appeared in the exhibit near of those of Krypton and Hay. In 2009, a painting of the Cray twins by Young was sold at auction. So there is so much, um, but it just makes you think, you know, why would why would he get away with it for so long? Um, and there's so many, people who do poison people these days and puts things in the food, and it is amazing people when you look at um the amount of poisoners out there that get away with it because nothing does show up. Um, but if you're going to do it to multiple people, you've got to realise that people have the same symptoms. Um, that it will come back and bite you. So there is a lot about people and poisoning. You've got Mary Ann Cotter as well, who was a British nurse and a housekeeper who was believed to have been Britain's most prolific female serial killer. She actually alleged to have poisoned up to 21 people. When there's another famous case for you that I will cover when I'm doing females, because I'm trying to go in between doing females and males as well, because I just don't want to be looking like I'm targeting um males when there is a lot of females out there. You've got Eileen Warnock's, other female serial killers as well. So I will be looking at that, folks. Um, at doing different types of um serial killers and poisoners and things like that, guys. But I hope I've no went on too long and I haven't put you to sleep. It is kind of weird doing a pre-record because I'm not used to doing record like a live. So this is a bit different for me. So I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, oh my god, I'm like, I'm doing a pre-record. So even though you guys are not here and you are not watching, I'm looking at the comments, expecting people to pop up. But as I said, guys, there will be one every week that will come out, and it will fall out on the Monday at 6 a.m. So, because now that I've got the hang of pre recording, because I actually thought I was going to mess it up, guys. So now that I've got the hand of pre recording, I'll definitely get my ones obviously pre recorded out. But I will cut it here, guys. And everyone have a good day and stay safe. And I will catch up with you guys when it comes to Thursday. See you, everyone. Bye.